we're going to change now the type of conference in a certain way, because this was a historical introduction, and now we're going to have a reflection on Nostra Aetate, on its consequences and its future. And we've asked a world-renowned Jewish scholar to start, and soon to be renowned Catholic scholar to give a response, even though it won't be exact response to the first conference. So I'm very happy, very honored to have with us Professor Israel Yuval, who teaches Jewish history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's the director, the academic director of the Mandel School of Advanced Studies in the Humanities. And the center of his work, but I'm sure we're going to see this also in the conference, are the reciprocal influences of Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity on each other and in their formation. And a new look that we can have since Nostra Aetate, also from a Jewish side. Thank you for being with us.
Rector of the Gregorian University, Father Nuno Gonçalves, Rector of the PBI, Father Michael Kolarczyk, Professor Etienne Veteux, Director of the Cardinal Bea Center for Judaic Studies, His Excellence, the Ambassador of Israel, dear Ms. Aldegonde Brenningmeier, distinguished guests. In this 18th annual Brenningmeier Wehrhahn lecture, I would like to explore the influence that the Nostra Aetate has had on the historical study of the relationship between Judaism and Christianity as we mark the 15th anniversary of the death of one of its most prominent architects, Cardinal Augustin Bea. I'm not a theologian, nor do I consider myself a religious person. I speak for myself and not for any religious group. I would like to argue that the Nostra Aetate brought about a new approach among Jewish scholars of the last generation regarding the history of Jewish-Christian relations. In order to demonstrate this shift, I will first present the research conventions what matters is not my name, but what I say. I will restart the sentence. In order to demonstrate this shift, I will first present the research conventions that underpinned the old research, and then the trends that developed in the new era of contemporary scholarship. The research of previous generations tended to see the relationship between early Christianity and Judaism through the metaphor of a mother-daughter relationship, with Judaism considered the mother religion and Christianity its offspring religion. In 1988, David Flusser published his important book, Judaism and the Origins of Christianity. The very title is indicative of the historical view that early Christianity derived its ideas from Second Temple Judaism. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls enhanced the mother-daughter paradigm. This paradigm also dominated the study of Talmudic literature. Although it was written hundreds of years after the New Testament, scholars tended to view the Talmud as a source for the New Testament. The clearest example of this is the 6-volume work by Hermann Strack and Paul Billerbeck, published in 1922, in which they demonstrated the parallels between the New Testament and the Talmud and Midrash. Their work was based on the underlying assumption that the Talmud reflects pre-Christian oral Jewish traditions. The opposite possibility, that these parallels reflected the New Testament's influence on Talmud, apparently did not even occur to them. The prevailing consensus in historical research was that while Christians often disputed with Jews about the interpretation of the Holy Scriptures, Jews throughout the first millennium did not show much interest in Christianity and its ideas. The mother religion was not interested in the religion of its offshoot, which departed from it and claimed to inherit it. Proof of this indifference appeared to be found in the sources themselves. In the Jerusalem Talmud, which was compiled in the second half of the 4th century, there is only scarce explicit reference to Christianity. In the Babylonian Talmud, with its 2,700 folios, the passages related to Christianity amount to a mere handful of pages. For hundreds of years, no anti-Christian polemic was written by Jews. The earliest of them was composed only in the 9th century in a Muslim environment, not a Christian one. The only anti-Christian book written was Toldot Yeshu, a sort of Jewish anti-gospel about Jesus' life, which presents a scornful counter-narrative that mocks the biography of Jesus that has been dated to the 5th or 6th century. The book does not seek to challenge Christian ideology or theology. Instead, it seeks to disprove the facts told about Jesus, that he was born of a virgin, that he performed miracles, or that he was resurrected. Scholars of this, I call it the indifferent school, also base their argument on the fact that until the 4th century, Christianity was a persecuted religion, and Christians a marginal minority in the Roman Empire. Therefore, according to this approach, the rabbis had no reason to turn their attention to an insignificant religion with only a limited public impact. The rare passages in which the Talmud contains some indications of polemic with Christianity were dated after Christianity became the religion of the empire in the 4th century. Greek and Roman paganism was regarded a dangerous competitor, not Christianity. Two prominent scholars, the historian Fritz Yitzhak Beer and the Talmud scholar Ephraim Urbach, started out as historians of the Middle Ages. Both were well aware of the centrality of Jewish polemic against Christianity as a key factor that shaped Judaism during that period. Both decided at a later stage in their career to turn to Talmudic literature. But when discussing its relation to Christianity, they reach different conclusions. Beer observed similarities between early Christianity and rabbinical Judaism, but argued that rabbinical Judaism was the result of the encounter between biblical Judaism and Hellenism in the 3rd century BCE, long before the advent of Christianity. He believed that Christianity was influenced by an early rabbinic Judaism. As for Urbach, my friend and colleague Oded Irshai, who is present here with us, has shown that Urbach took a less unequivocal view of the matter. Unlike most scholars in his day, he did identify anti-Christian activity among the rabbis, but he saw it as a marginal phenomenon designed to strengthen the demarcation of boundaries between Judaism and Christianity. The debate took place, in Urbach's opinion, only on the extreme front with Christianity, and its aim was to prevent the infiltration of Christian ideas into the internal religious core of rabbinic Judaism. The image that emerged was one of a Talmudic Judaism that developed within its own boundaries without any real links with its surrounding Christian environment. I remember my own astonishment as a young student encountering this worldview perspective. After all, the Talmud and Midrash shared the same spatial and cultural background with early Christianity. This attitude is even more surprising in light of the fact that these same scholars did not hesitate to argue for a profound influence of classical Greek culture on the Talmudic and Midrashic world. Jewish scholars were fond of the idea that the religious ideas of the sages were a product of the encounter with Greek culture. It was the fashion in Germany in the 19th century to regard Athens as the cradle of German culture. Thus, for instance, the Pinakothek was the name given by King Ludwig I of Bavaria to the new museum he built in Munich when he wanted to turn that city into a second Athens. The discipline of Jewish studies was born in Germany, and the Jewish scholars wished to situate the Talmud as being part of a wider Greek cultural milieu. The possibility that Christianity also played a role in the formation of Rabbinic Judaism was beyond their imagination. Ideas of innovative scholars such as Robert Eisler or David Daube, who dared to raise such possibilities, were rejected with contempt. Allow me to offer a distinct example. In 1957, Siegfried Stein published his thesis about some possible similarities between the structure of the Seder evening in Passover night and the Greek symposium. The article was well received. Then, 23 years ago, in 1995, I published an article in which I argued that Christian motifs can be found in the Jewish Haggadah for Pesach. To my mind, in terms of historical probability, a Hellenistic background of the Seder night is more speculative than a Christian context. But my thesis was not accepted for not providing proof. Indeed, both of us, Stein and I, offered interpretations that could not have been proven, but criticism for the absence of proof was leveled only at my article. From this case, one may deduce that while it is the role of historians to interpret historical facts, the willingness to accept the interpretation depends on the zeitgeist. Another example can be gleaned from the interpretation of the morning blessings, the so-called in Hebrew Birkot HaShachar, which is a series of blessings that are recited at the beginning of Jewish morning prayer, thanking God for the renewal of the day. They include, among others, 3 blessings. Blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, who has not made me a goy, a non-Jew, who has not made me a slave, and who has not made me a woman. Saul Lieberman, one of the greatest Talmudic scholars of the 20th century, discussed the various formulas of these blessings and examined parallel sayings in non-Jewish literature. He refers to Plato, who used to thank God for having been born a man and not a beast, a male and not female, a Hellenist and not a barbarian. Lieberman also mentions similar statements attributed to Socrates, Thales, and Diogenes Laertius by Hermippus. Not all of these thinkers are exactly household names. But one famous name, much more familiar than Hermippus, is not mentioned by Lieberman: Paul, and his well-known statement in Galatians 3:28, I quote, "There is no longer Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus." The Jewish blessings and Paul's declaration are in the same order, but they convey an opposite meaning. Why did Lieberman leave Paul out? Probably because he was a Christian. After presenting the similarities between the Jewish blessings and Plato's blessing, Lieberman concludes that the Jewish blessings were not influenced by Plato. I quote, "There is no need to see external influences here, since these blessings are about God's goodness with man, and it is the nature of every human being to be aware of that." End quote. Lieberman is the author of the important books How Much Greek in Jewish Palestine and Hellenism in Jewish Palestine, which explore the influence of Greek culture on Jewish Palestine in the first centuries. Why did he shy away from exploring the possible presence of external influences in this case? It seems reasonable to assume that his basic premises prevented him from presenting Paul's position and to discuss the possibility that the sages formulated these three blessings not following Plato, who lived 500 years before their time, but in response to Paul, who shared their cultural milieu. For me, it seems obvious that their declaration emphasized their particularistic approach vis-à-vis Paul's universalism. Lieberman, so it seems, intentionally avoided that kind of discourse. The indifference towards Christianity that scholars of previous generations attributed to the rabbis was paralleled by their own absence of interest in the Jewish-Christian discourse. A common spirit connects them with the Talmudic sages: suspicion and fear of Christianity. It is not only indifference that we see here, but rather a deliberate intention to sideline the centrality of Christianity, the result of a long-standing, deep-rooted Jewish fear of this rival religion that progressed throughout history intimately close to each Jewish sister. This joint march was conducted in uneven circumstances, Christianity enjoying all along the upper hand. Unlike her medieval visual representation, the synagogue did not resemble in beauty and appearance to her rival sister, the Ecclesia. In historical reality, Judaism was weak, persecuted, and humiliated. Such uneven power relations led Jews to avoid open confrontation with Christianity. This situation led to what James Scott, in his book Dominance and the Art of Resistance, called hidden transcripts, or as Leo Strauss put it in his book Persecution and the Art of Writing, as reading between the lines. I do not claim that Judaism suffered persecution in the first century, certainly not by Christians. The persecution was cultural, a feeling that Christianity deprived Jews of their literary and spiritual assets. The church took possession of their holy scriptures, their holy land, and their self-perception as a holy people, and appropriate all this for itself. This fear, which sometimes turned to antagonism and even hatred, persisted throughout the Middle Ages and into the modern era. The Jewish research of the previous generations was partially constrained by the tradition of fear that led to muteness. The claim of Jewish indifference towards Christianity began to undergo revision in the 1990s. More and more studies dealt with the hidden arguments of the Talmudic sources against Christianity. More and more studies pointed to an ideological proximity between Christians and Jews. It became a new fashionable enterprise to search for traces of Christianity or Christian traditions in stories, anecdotes, and Talmudic sermons where no one had ever thought of finding them. The strategy of reading between the lines proposed by Leo Strauss was applied by the new generation of scholars. Strauss concludes his discussion with the following observation, I quote, "The works of the great writers of the past are very beautiful, yet their visible beauty is sheer ugliness compared with the beauty of those hidden treasures which disclose themselves only after very long, never easy, but always pleasant work." Strauss was not the first to expose such a hidden methodology of interpretation. Here is what the book of the Zohar, the most important work of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, which was composed in Spain at the end of 13th century, says about reading canonical text between the lines. I quote, "All concealed things that the Blessed Holy One does, he has placed within the Holy Torah. All is found there. That concealed matter is revealed by the Torah, but immediately closed in another garment, hidden there and not revealed. The wise, who are full of eyes, see it through the garment. And when that matter is revealed, they, the wise, cast an eye upon it. Although immediately concealed, it is not lost to their sight." In what follows, the Zohar uses a metaphor that transforms the interpretation of the text into one describing erotic love. The text is depicted as an alluring woman and the interpreter as her lover. Interpretation is possible only when he truly loves the text. I quote again, "This may be compared," says the Zohar, "to a beloved maiden, beautiful in form and appearance, concealed secretly in her palace. She has a single lover, unknown to anyone except to her. Out of the love that he feels for her, this lover passes by her gate constantly, lifting his eyes to every side. Knowing that her lover is constantly circling her gate, what does she do? She opens a little window in that secret palace where she is, reveals her face to her lover, and quickly withdraws, concealing herself. None of those near the lover sees or notices. Only the lover and his inner being and heart and soul follow her. He knows that out of love for him, she revealed herself for a moment to arouse him." This beautiful parable reminds what is said of Socrates in Plato's Symposium. I quote, "If you listen to Socrates' discourses, you would feel them at first to be quite ridiculous. On the outside, they are clothed with such absurd words and phrases, so that anyone inexpert and thoughtless might laugh at his speeches and scorn them. But when these are opened and you obtain a fresh view of them by getting inside, you will discover that they are the only speeches which have any sense in them, and that none are so divine, so rich in images of virtue." These classical sources show that reading between the lines is not a new invention, but rather a methodology used long ago in ancient sources. In the early 2000s, I suggested considering the two religions as sisters, and the flow of ideas between them, the flow on a dual carriageway. Later, I developed the argument in a series of lectures, and one of them even here in the Gregoriana in 2013, when I proposed to amend the definition of sister religions and to return to the old image of mother versus daughter religions, but at times reversing the roles of the mother and daughter. In many instances, Christianity was the mother religion of rabbinical Judaism. I came to this conclusion after a series of studies on the evolvement of notions pertaining to sacred time, focusing on the Christian impact on the Jewish holidays, Passover versus Easter, Shavuot versus Pentecost, Hanukkah and Christmas, as well as other key ideas such as the Jewish messianic idea that draws some of its imaginaire from Christianity. I also observed, and this is to my humble judgment even more significant, that the very creation of the Mishnah and Talmud, known as the oral law, and the prohibition to put them down in writing was itself a reaction to the New Testament and to the textualization of early Christianity. Recently, I have been working on the idea of rest in the Jewish Shabbat and the tension between Shabbat and Sunday as being also an expression of the hidden competition of rabbinical Talmudic Judaism with parallel Christian ideas. This does not always denote a polemic. Sometimes it is rather an adoption of Christian ideas, their acculturation in Jewish discourse, and finally their Judaization. Talmudic Judaism is no longer seen as a religion that tries to isolate itself, but rather as a religion that made huge efforts to preserve its identity while integrating new religious ideas. Naturally, I'm not alone in this great research and cultural drama. I have already mentioned my long-time friend, Professor Oded Irshai, who is a leading figure in this new study. 30 years ago, a close friend accused me of being obsessed with finding Christianity in every Jewish text. This obsession has since become the fashion. Why has a centuries-old trend to see Christianity as an enemy suddenly changed? What are the reasons for Jewish scholars' current tremendous interest in Christianity? Think about the establishment of the Center for the Study of Christianity at the Hebrew University, funded by two great Christian souls, the late Hubert Zichrono Livracha and Aldegonde Brenningmeier Verhan. I cannot imagine that such a center could have been established in Jerusalem 40 years ago. There can be several explanations. It can be understood as a reaction of the second generation to parents who immigrated from Europe to Israel, who now view Christianity as a breach to European culture, to which they want to belong. A second explanation has to do with the encounter of Israelis of our generation with the New Testament, which is not perceived anymore as an alien book of another religion, but rather as a book that describes the ancient landscape and narrates the history of our homeland. I can think of a third, less positive explanation, namely that in light of the current heated conflict with Islam, it has become more convenient for Jewish researchers to enter into an alliance with Christianity. These three explanations are certainly part of the answer, but I would like to suggest another explanation, that in the wake of Nostra Aetate, Jewish fear of Christianity has faded away among scholars. To my impression, the most intensive reaction to the Nostra Aetate from the Jewish side was not provided by Jewish rabbis or thinkers, but by Jewish researchers. Nostra Aetate allowed them to envisage not only a different Christianity, but also a different Judaism. Nostra Aetate has allowed Jewish academia to listen more attentively to the inner voices of the Talmudic sources, those that along the history have been silenced. We encounter this divide between scholarly and popular approaches in the classrooms, in our meetings with students. My students tend to ask, why did the church fuel the persecutions of the Jews in the Middle Ages? In response, I suggest they ask why it tolerated them at all. Why were Jews the only non-Christian minority to live in a Christian Europe for 1500 years? And why did Auschwitz not occur in the Middle Ages? For many Israelis, the pistol that Christianity laid on the table in the first act by accusing the Jews for Jesus' murder, fired in the last act during the Holocaust. Even after Nostra Aetate, many Jews in Israel still prefer the negative story, probably because the long history of suffering can serve as justification for the existence of the State of Israel. I would like to conclude on a personal note. For 30 years, I have devoted my energies to studying the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. This has been the great intellectual and emotional drama of my life, which touches upon questions of cultural identities. Even such meeting between Jewish and Christian scholars, like the one taking place here today, is exciting and at the same time intriguing too. My dream is to see Jews and Christians studying the history of their religions together. Such intellectual encounters may offer a gateway also to the marketplace where people, ideas, and customs meet. Let Jews and Christians meet in houses of study and in the marketplaces, as they did in the past in Caesarea, Antioch, and Rome. The fear, antagonism, and hatred of the past have obscured our common heritage. We are lucky to be living in a new era. Thank you.
A few remarks or questions to your lecture, Mr. Yuval. You were talking about St. Paul, and you were saying that it could be compared to the blessings of the morning prayers, and that Lieberman has left these parallels out of his interpretation. Do you see any other research points or research projects on St. Paul from your historical point of view? Do you think that this is a liturgical point? Yeah. Do you see any other projects that we can work on?
What do you mean by projects?
Like
specific cases of?
Yeah, I'm thinking of. St. Paul is there's a rereading in philosophy in the 20th century, and especially the recent 20 or 30 years, like Giorgio Agamben from. He's well known here, I suppose. He reread this. Letters to the Romans, or Jakob Taubes, and so forth. They are philosophers, and I would be interested if you see any a potential for historical work on St. Paul?
I see a lot of potential, many possibilities. The result of the neglect of the research in previous generations to consider Paul as a candidate for comparison with Talmudic sources led, for instance, I just mentioned it because you mentioned it, the epistle to the Romans, chapter 11, when he says that all Israel will be saved. Mm-hmm. Well, this is more or less the opening of the 10th chapter in the tractate Sanhedrin of the Mishnah, which also says that all Israel have a share in the world to come. And to my astonishment, nobody came to the elementary idea, I mean, fundamental, basic, to compare the two sayings. Mm-hmm. In terms of comparison, Paul is definitely earlier than the Mishnah. So my inclination is to consider the statement in the Mishnah as a response to Paul. Mm-hmm. Or I'll give you another example, the question of the election of Israel. There is a very beautiful, what we call midrash, exegesis, to the book of Deuteronomy, in which there is an emphasis on the election of Israel related to Jacob, not to Abraham. And the Midrash is fully aware to the fact that Abraham had two sons. One was elected, the other one was rejected. And Isaac had also the question of, had the Jacob and Esau. And Esau was rejected. Only Jacob, says the Midrash, has had 12 sons, and all were, these are the 10 tribes of Israel. So the Midrash emphasizes the fact that the election of Israel does not go back to Abraham, because out of Abraham we had those who were rejected, but to Jacob. I read this text as a clear interpretation which faced the challenge posed by Paul. Mm-hmm. There are many examples like that I don't know. We spoke today in the morning about the blindness of the Jews. They were blind for their own literature, perhaps, not seeing what seems to be, I think, self-evident. Mm-hmm. So I can give more examples that may show, and I think this is now more and more accepted, that the beginning of the dialogue with Christianity, I call it a dialogue, goes back to the very beginning of Rabbinic Judaism, from the very beginning, not only later when Christianity became the religion of the empire, but from the very beginning, already in the so-called Tanaitic sources, we find many sources that indicate what I called sometimes a hidden conflict. It is not mentioned. You don't want to mention Christians, but you allude to them. And once you accept this methodology, as you said, I think we can really read the Jewish sources with new glasses. And this is, I think, a huge project that needs to be done.
Thank you.